Great to see you all this morning. Very many thanks for joining us at this webinar entitled An A for Effort, How Reading Made the A List for Climate Action. My name is Peter Moore. I'm Head of Climate Strategy at Reading Borough Council, and we're very pleased to be supporting our partners in the Reading Climate Action Network in delivering this event as part of the fourth Reading Climate Festival. So the festival is a series of events that started on 10th of June this year and continues until the 21st of June tomorrow to inspire climate action across Reading and beyond. It's a sad day for Reading. It marks the third anniversary of the fatal attack that we saw in the Forbury Gardens in the centre of the town, which will be marked with a civic memorial later today. So just a reminder to anybody that wants to pay their respects that a minute's silence will be observed at around 7 o'clock this evening. Tomorrow's also an important date in the Reading calendar, as it is Show Your Stripes Day. And Show Your Stripes, for those who aren't familiar with it, is an initiative led by our partners at the University of Reading to promote the climate stripes, shown on my slide here. And that's a data visualization created by Professor Ed Hawkins at the University of Reading to communicate the reality of our warming climate by showing the progression from the blue, cooler years to the warmer red years. And these are the climate stripes for Berkshire, which go back to 1863. And that imagery is now being used around the world to communicate the reality of climate change. We're very, very proud that that was invented in Reading. Delighted to be joined today by Helena from Carbon Disclosure Project, who's going to kick us off by giving an introduction to CDP, its purpose and its platforms, following which I'll come back in and give you a bit of insight on Reading's experience of working with CDP and disclosing our climate action data via their system. So I will stop sharing, hand over to you, Helena, and I believe you're going to share your own presentation from your end.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Let me just figure out how to share my screen. All right, can you see the slide? Yeah, great. Well, thank you for that introduction, Peter, and hello, everybody. I recognize quite a few names today. So yeah, my name is Helena and I'm the UK Engagement Officer here at CDP. And as Peter said, I'm here to introduce CDP, talk a bit about how we work, both with local authorities and with businesses. I'll talk a little bit about the benefits of disclosure and then how we, how the data we collect can be used and how it is used as well. So let's get started with a short introduction to CDP. So CDP was founded over 20 years ago in response to the global challenge of climate change. Our founders were looking for a way to drive more transparency in business and the impact that it has on our natural environment. So coming from the financial sector, they wanted to leverage their network of investors to engage the largest stock listed companies on the topic of climate change. And since then, CDP has grown into a global environmental nonprofit following a clear vision. And that vision is to build an economy that truly works for both people and the planet. To have a good shot at realizing this vision, it has become clear that we need reliable and comparable data. And yeah, indeed, after all, you cannot manage what you don't measure. And so the idea is to focus investors, companies, cities, local governments, states and regions to drive action towards sustainable economy by measuring, understanding and managing their environmental impacts. So technically speaking, what we do is run an annual reporting cycle during which we invite all of the stakeholders I just mentioned to respond to our various questionnaires. So I know a lot of you will be familiar with our work with local authorities and cities, but a big part of what CDP does is working with companies. So I'll also be covering that in today's presentation. So just to give you an idea of how much we've grown over the past 20 years. So in 2002, we had 228 companies disclosed to CDP. And as you can see on the graph, in 2022, we had over 20,000 stakeholders disclosed. So that includes companies, but also cities, states and regions. And just to give you an idea, the companies that disclose to CDP represent over 64% of the global market value. And then just zooming in on the UK, because that's where we are today. So we've been working with local authorities in the UK since 2018. And in 2022, we had 62 UK local authorities report to CDP. The figures there on the slide just give you an idea of what that represents in terms of UK emissions, population and GDP. And in terms of companies, we had over 670 companies headquartered in the UK report to CDP in 2022. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about the main benefits of reporting. Before I start, I just want to say that I have adapted this presentation to cover both local authorities and companies. So if you do want a more in-depth call to understand the benefits of reporting for your organisation, I don't know if we have any businesses in the audience today, but I invite you to get in touch, and I'll be sharing contact details at the end of my presentation, and I'm sure we can circulate slides after the event. I think overall, both for companies and local authorities, reporting can really serve as a tool to help manage your climate strategy and ultimately drive change within your organisation and or across your local area. So first of all, the questionnaire encourages you to, well, our questionnaires encourage you to identify environmental risks and impacts, as well as opportunities for change and action. Our questionnaires can really act as a framework to guide your climate action planning. So by filling out the questionnaire, especially in your first year of reporting, you'll be able to see what data is being asked from you, and this will help you identify which areas and actions you should be focusing on and prioritising. And this isn't just CDP deciding what to include in our questionnaire. We're aligned with a number of frameworks, and I have a slide later on just going over which frameworks and initiatives that we align with. So linked to that, one of the kind of most well-known benefits CDP is our scoring mechanism, which can really help shine a light on areas for improvement and gaps in your climate action, and then also can be used to benchmark your progress against peers. So and then the next point is the questionnaire can be used as a tool for internal engagement. We don't just ask for emissions data. We're not just focusing on carbon. We're really kind of aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, and our questionnaire covers, mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. We're also asking for data on food, waste, water. So the data that you need to collect in order to respond to our questionnaire might not sit just within the climate team. And so we often hear from local authorities that going through the process of gathering data and information that doesn't necessarily sit within one team is extremely useful and can be used as a tool to engage with other departments, other colleagues. And that's really important because the response that we need in order to address the climate crisis will need to sit across departments, and we'll need buy-in from the entire organisation to identify opportunities for change, to shift ways of doing things. So yeah, and just going back to the scoring process, we often hear from local authorities that receiving a score, it might not be the A that they're looking for, but actually receiving a D, a C, or a B can be used to leverage additional resource from leadership and the council, and or from kind of board members if we're thinking about a business. And then finally, all of this can ultimately help improve your reputation, demonstrate your ambition or your leadership, help you gain competitiveness in a world where regulators and stakeholders are placing more and more importance on environmental issues. So I'm just going to focus a bit more on scoring. So as mentioned, one of our most well-known benefits of reporting to CDP is receiving a score on a yearly basis. And we've really designed our scoring methodology to help companies and local governments track and guide their progress towards environmental leadership. So yeah, Our scoring reflects the 4 steps of a journey with 4 scoring bands. So from D, the disclosure scoring band, all the way to A, the leadership scoring band. And the intention behind that is to give you space to progress step by step and year on year. So this journey starts with disclosure, which simply, we want you to start assessing and being transparent on your organization's environmental impact, key environmental risks, just kind of gaining a basic understanding of how climate change will impact your organization and how your organization is impacting the environment. So by disclosing, you let your stakeholders know where you're at on this journey. And as we've mentioned, disclosure allows you to become aware of the environmental impact as well as climate-related risks and how this affects your organization. That awareness allows you to improve your climate action planning and risk management. And then by better managing the climate risks and impact of your organization, you reach leadership. So what we mean by leadership, we want to see local authorities and organizations, businesses that are not only recognizing their environmental impact, but are being, setting really ambitious targets and are taking proactive action to tackle the climate crisis. So I'm now going to move on to the alignment of our questionnaire with other frameworks and initiatives. As I mentioned earlier, we are aligned. We try to align as much as possible with best practice and other frameworks. So this is looking at the corporate questionnaires. So if you're reporting to CDP as a business, we have 3 different questionnaires: climate change, water, and forests. And I'm not going to go through each of these frameworks and initiatives, but yeah, this just gives you an idea of alignment with other frameworks. And just to note that as regulation and reporting requirements evolve, CDP will, I think somebody is not muted, but
Yeah, sorry if you just joined us and you're not Helena, if you could mute, that'd be great. We'll take some questions later. Thanks.
So as regulation and reporting requirements evolve, CDP will continue to align with the necessary frameworks to ensure that our questionnaires are always relevant and that when you report to CDP, you're creating a comparable data set that allows you to pull data out of your CDP disclosure and use it in other reports. And then looking at our cities or local authorities questionnaire. So yeah, our cities questionnaire is also aligned to a number of frameworks and initiatives. So that includes all of the frameworks or projects that you can see on this slide, but also the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure and Sustainable Development Goals. That also means that our questionnaire is what we call a one-stop shop for all of your reporting requirements. So by reporting to CDP, you can fulfill your reporting requirements for any of the initiatives listed here. And if you're not part of any of those initiatives, you can also join them through our platform. So moving on to kind of how the data is used or how it can be used. So who uses CDP data? This just gives you an idea of where CDP sits. Our data is used by policymakers, civil society, the finance community, academics, the business community. So yeah, a huge range of uses. And I think the main thing that people think of is how it's used by the financial community, specifically our corporate data. So we provide one of the most comprehensive, comparable TCFD-aligned environmental data sets, and CDP really sits at the heart of the capital market response to environmental risks. Most of the major ESG research and ratings providers license data from CDP, and we continue to have conversations with large data providers to further integrate CDP into those platforms. And then again, looking at our cities data, it is used by governments, NGOs, intergovernmental organizations, the private sector, investors are also looking at it, academics, policymakers. Just to highlight a few, our data has been used by the World Health Organization, it's been included in IPCC reports, and it's used in the UNFCCC's Global Climate Action Portal. We also have an open data portal for all of our publicly reported cities data, so you can take a look at what cities around the world are doing. So I just wanted to end on this point here. I think it won't be new to anybody in the audience that local authorities in the UK have set really ambitious targets. They've developed really bold strategies to address our climate challenge, yet they're only directly responsible for approximately 2 to 5% of area-wide emissions. So it's clear that they cannot achieve these targets alone. And so it's critical for councils to work with other stakeholders, including the private sector, to deliver the ambitious and coordinated local climate action needed to tackle the climate crisis. Dialogue between cities and companies can help each of those stakeholders learn from each other, disseminate best practice, align priorities, and potentially coordinate or collaborate on action. And CDP, being a reporting platform for both cities and local authorities, as well as companies, is well placed to help kind of facilitate that collaboration. And so I just wanted to highlight 3 ways that CDP can support that dialogue and collaboration. So I think the first thing is, repeating what I've said until now. One of the main benefits of reporting is just understanding where you're at as an organisation in your climate action journey. Local authorities and businesses cannot manage what they don't measure. And so without adequate data, an organisation can only make assumptions on their emissions, their targets. That can limit your ability to track progress, and it can limit engagement with other partners. Disclosure really ensures accountability and allows you to establish baselines. It allows you to understand key sectors that need to be targeted and opportunities for high impact action. The second way CDP can support this dialogue is, once you've started reporting as an organisation, you can start using CDP scoring or searching full responses to identify potential stakeholders to partner with. So perhaps you're a local authority looking for companies in your area that are already leading on climate action. So you can use CDP's data to identify those partners. Perhaps you want to know which companies have a major presence in your local area and what their priorities are for addressing climate change. So CDP data can help provide a basis for initial conversations. And maybe you're at the stage where you've established partnerships with local companies, you've defined common goals, you've decided to collaborate on different actions. It's really important to be able to monitor and evaluate progress. So using a common reporting framework, such as CDP's reporting, can help ensure that you're working with the same information. It can ensure transparency about the process, inspire trust in each partner and its climate commitments, and keep the group of partners accountable. So, as I said, I just wanted to include contact details if you would like to find out more about reporting, either as a company or as a local authority. And I also wanted to use this opportunity to invite you all to an event that we're holding next week as part of London Climate Action Week on the topic of engaging with local businesses on climate action. We'll be joined by speakers from the City Business Climate Alliance, Manchester Climate Change Agency, and Oxford City Council to share insights on how local authorities and cities can build successful partnerships with the private sector. That's it from me. I'll hand back over to you, Peter. I think I've stopped sharing.
Yeah.
And happy to take questions later.
Great. Okay, we'll take questions after my bit, if that's okay with everyone. Thanks again, Helena, for that excellent introduction to CDP. Is everyone seeing my slides again? If I could get a thumbs up from...
Yeah.
Yep, great. Okay, before I talk about our experience of engaging with CD as Reading Borough Council, just a very brief introduction to Reading, for those who might not be familiar with it. Often said to be the largest town in England, which isn't the city, with a population of about 174,000 within our borough area. But the wider urban area is about 275,000 population, making it the 4th largest. I'm very proud of our diverse population, our thriving and resilient economy, but a really important thing to note about Reading, not all of that economic success is equally shared. So we've been described as a 3rd least equal city in the UK, due to the gap between the best off and the worst off. And that's obviously a concern when we know that the impacts of climate change will hit the most vulnerable the hardest. We're a unitary local authority with a fairly stable political sort of administration, a majority Labour administration, and also I'm proud to say a long tradition of climate action within the borough. With the first climate strategy we developed was back in 2007-8, which was also around the time that Reading developed something called the Reading Climate Change Partnership. As Helena said, we're responsible for a fairly small proportion of borough emissions, about 1.3% by our calculations in the case of Reading. So we very clearly have to work with our partners to achieve our climate ambitions, and we do that through something called Reading Climate Change Partnership, which brings together senior representatives of all the key sectors across Reading. And the public-facing brand of the partnership is the Reading Climate Action Network, in whose name the Climate Festival is being held. Helena, you'd have to shut your ears at this point because I'm going to make a confession about how our the process by which we came to report initially via CDP was not entirely intentional. So the leader of the council phoned me one day. He'd been asked to sign up to UK 100's Race to Zero campaign and asked me if there was any reason why we shouldn't. So I looked at the implied commitments, which I've summarised on this slide, and concluded that we were pretty much doing all of that already. So it was a fairly easy decision, and I recommended that he sign us up. And the second of those conditions on that slide, reporting annually on council area emissions, which we've done for many years, is the key one for the purposes of today's discussion. So we signed up, we patted ourselves on the back, and a few months later, an email arrived from this organisation called CDP saying we look forward to receiving your completed questionnaire by the end of July, to which our initial reaction was something like that. But once we got over the initial surprise of realizing that we'd signed up to something we hadn't realized, there was no going back. We reckoned that if a job's worth doing, it was worth doing well, and we knuckled down and engaged with the CDP platform to the best of our ability, worked our way through it with the help of the excellent team at CDP, Helena and her colleagues, and submitted our information to their judgment. And a few months later, we were delighted to receive notification that we'd been added to the CDP A list of councils taking bold climate action. And no one was more delighted than Leader, who'd had the exceptional foresight, of course, to sign us up to Race to Zero in the first place. Helena's talked about benefits of disclosing. I'll just give you my take on that from our perspective as an organisation submitting our information via CDP. I guess the first is not so much a benefit as an obligation about transparency, particularly for public bodies and listed companies. We really need to be transparent with the wider public about our progress and the action that we're taking. As I said, we'd always been pretty open about our emissions reporting with an annual report for over a decade that we'd been producing, but we hadn't previously subjected ourselves to scrutiny by an external third party as we did by submitting to CDP. Clearly, there's some reputational benefit of being seen to be transparent, but increasingly risk of being seen not to be transparent. And people wonder why you're not disclosing information if you're not in the current climate. As Helena said, benchmarking against your peers is a really important benefit of disclosing via a platform like CDP. And fourthly, I'd say for any councils, local authorities on the call, you'll all be aware of the exercises being conducted by various NGOs to judge councils on their climate action, some of which seem to be done using questionable criteria, should we say, and methodology that perhaps we wouldn't have chosen ourselves. But being independently assessed by a body like CDP, which has got robust systems and trained professionals making the judgments, perhaps gives more credibility to the assessment and potentially gives you a bit more control over the narrative about performance than being at the mercy of what the activists might be saying about your performance. Reporting to a body like CDP also enables you to reflect on what you've achieved. Celebrating success is a really important thing to do, I think, and really important to celebrate the achievements of partners as well as the council, and to benefit from the learning of peers. We very much approach climate action Reading as a partnership effort, and feel it's important to celebrate when partners do things well, as well as when the council does. The process also requires you to have a greater focus on evidence and impact, and that's a really good thing. And as Helena said, in our experience, it brings you into contact with other parts of the organisation, because you have to go searching for some of the information that the questionnaire and the process requires you to collate, and that is a great way in to open up conversations about climate that might not otherwise have happened. And in our experience, at least, I would say, we found that we were really well supported through the process by the very friendly and helpful team at CDP. So I painted a pretty rosy picture there, but in the interest of full disclosure, I should say that reporting to CDP or any other platform is probably not a decision to be entered into lightly. It's an intuitive and a fairly self-explanatory platform, but there are some technical components. It will involve a commitment to time, at least the first time you do it. Gets easier when you update your submission in subsequent years. And like I say, we will need the collaboration of some of your colleagues in other departments to provide some of the information required. I suppose you could say if the assessment doesn't come out positively, there's a bit of reputational risk, but one of the nice things about CDP is they don't go in for the sort of name and shame tactic. Only the results of the A-list entries are published, and the emphasis is very much on continuous improvement and supporting you to do better rather than criticising you for not doing everything right. Similarly, you might find as you dig into the evidential base for some things that some of the claims which might have been made by colleagues or predecessors don't stand up to scrutiny. That's not been our experience, I'm happy to say, but I would say either way, you're better off knowing that in any case, and the sooner that you uncover those sorts of issues, the better. And finally, I would say that transparency obviously has to be a long-term commitment. Once that genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back, or to mix another metaphor, disclosures for life and not just for Christmas. So with those health warnings out there, if you're still minded to go down the disclosure route, and I'd strongly recommend you do so, a few words of advice for what they're worth. First of all, I'd say don't try and game the system. That's not really in the spirit of the exercise. You've just got to be honest with yourself and the assessors. And if you have to leave a few blanks, you don't have the answer to everything, that's absolutely fine. You've got to focus on the most significant actions. There's scope to put lots of detail into the CDP questionnaire, but we've got 150 actions in our climate strategy. It would have been foolish to try and summarize them all. So, pick on the big initiatives and really just focus on the things that are most significant. Strongly encourage you to include partners in the process. We did more of that last year on our second year of submitting to CDP, and we had a richer and more detailed submission to make as a result. Use the support on offer. As I've said, it's very good, and they expect and want to be helpful. And again, for any local authorities in the audience, if you familiarise yourself with the scatter data, that would really help you with the CDP process, because their data reads across very neatly into the CDP platform. Just a word about other disclosure processes. CDP is obviously a voluntary process, an elective process, but any larger businesses out there will be aware already that there are increasing obligations for mandatory reporting, such as the SERC process. The Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting process. If you've been bidding for a public sector business, you'll be aware that under public procurement notices, bidders for contracts over £5 million are now expected to provide details of carbon reduction plans. All those kind of mandatory reporting requirements we expect to be extended down the chain to SMEs in some form at some point. And it's worth saying, I think, that if you're already complying with mandatory reporting, the extra work involved to meet voluntary reporting requirements, or indeed the other way around, can be relatively modest. And as Helena says, the systems generally talk to each other, and CDP certainly acts as a one-stop shop and has helped us with a number of reporting requirements, including, for example, the Global Covenant of Mayors initiative. There are other reporting frameworks out there. Helena's mentioned a few of these, so I'm not going to dwell on them, and they're joined up with the CDP platform. But CDP is the one that we use because it's generally regarded as the gold standard for environmental reporting. And a note for any SMEs in the audience, I do recognise that some of those global frameworks can be a bit daunting, a bit onerous, but you can still use them as a checklist for things to be thinking about, even if you don't go down the full disclosure route. And there's a lot more tailored guidance on the UK SME Climate Hub, which was set up by government when the UK hosted COP26. So do use that information if that's of help. Just going to close on a couple of slides that hopefully show we're not just talking a good game in Reading. So this is the graph for BEIS data on area emissions within the scope of influence of local authorities, which shows that, and this is the 2020 data, which is the last year for which the data is available. It goes up to, and that shows that since 2005, Reading's emissions by that measure, which we know is not a perfect measure, but it's one of the best we've got, Reading's emissions have fallen by about 55%. And that's the fourth largest reduction out of 374 local authority areas. And the next slide is the graph for our Borough Council corporate emissions, which shows that since our baseline year of 2008-9, we've cut our emissions by 71.3%. And that currently just about on track to hit our corporate carbon plan target of an 85% cut by 2025. So I hope those two bits of information provide some reassurance that we must be doing something right. We're certainly heading in the right direction, though obviously we know we need to increase the pace to meet our very ambitious targets. And my final slide before we open up for questions is just a call to action really on our partnership website. You can find out more via that link. Make a pledge as an organisation or an individual to take climate action and even become a climate champion. We'd be delighted to hear from you if that's of interest. So at that point, I think I'll stop sharing and we'd be very happy to take questions for myself or for Helena. You bear with me, I'm just going to see if I can get the running order of hands. It looks
to have a few questions in the chat.
Okay, well, I'll take the hands first and then we'll pick up the chat in a minute. So it looks like Joseph might be the first hand to go up. Joseph Hodgkinson.
Oh, hello. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask broadly, with this CDP system, why would you potentially go for that over something, let's say, like BREEAM?
I think they're serving slightly different purposes. So BREEAM standards are something that we've got enshrined in our local plan policy, which we sort of, up the level of ambition around when we were redoing our local plan at the same time that the council was declaring a climate emergency back in 2019. So that really applies to building standards particularly for new development. This is much more about broader corporate and area performance and initiatives in terms of the reporting platform to CDP. So they're not mutually exclusive, I think, sir, is the answer, if that's helpful.
Well, I mean, I guess the reason I'm asking is because we have a lot of clients that utilize it for planning conditions, use BREEAM, and actually some of them have found that the standard isn't always great for them, and so potentially looking for other options, and this could be a very good option for some of our clients. Could it potentially fall in place as a planning requirement, or could we, because there seems to be a lot of similar metrics, could we potentially offer one instead of the other for a planning condition?
I mean, I don't know what Helena thinks. I think that probably wouldn't work. BREEAM's an established standard specifically for that job of making sure that buildings are meeting appropriate standards of energy and other resource efficiency measures. There are other standards out there, but BREEAM's one that often features in as a planning requirement because it does that. It's designed to do that specific job. Of course, there are the standards we expect to ratchet up over time as a result of statutory action. So we've got Future Homes Standard coming down the line, which will push up the energy efficiency expectations still further. So your clients need to be aware of that stuff on the horizon. But I wouldn't see CDP as a replacement or alternative to BREEAM, certainly in that context. Is that right, Helena? Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, somewhat.
Okay. Next hand I can see it was Carol Boardman.
Thanks, Peter. It's Carol Boardman from Wigan Council. Thank you for the presentation, and to Helena too. Just got a few questions with regards to kind of our emissions detailing. So our picture in Wigan, and we're also part of Greater Manchester Combined Authority, so we're a city, region, local authority too, as well as being a Metropolitan Borough Council, is we report on the full extent of our emissions as we possibly can. So include scope 3, more importantly, purchase goods and service element, which make up 85% of our total emissions. So what we find is that there's a number of authorities, obviously yourselves included, who are obviously aiming for that carbon neutrality target of scope 1, scope 2, and there's big steps being made there clearly. But I just wonder, both from CDP element and also Reading, really how we can be scoring cities and authorities as A when they're not including the full scope of their emissions, when roughly between 80 and 90% of our emissions aren't being reported because people aren't reporting on purchased goods and services. I appreciate it's quite extensive to do. We worked with Anthesis to get to our level and then be able to report on it individually going forward. But I just wonder why, you know, the A standard can currently be achieved when local authorities aren't reporting on the full extent of their emissions. And just with regards to our borough level emissions, I think what we've got to be mindful of is obviously that data that we get through from what was formerly BASE from 2005. I think we've all dropped to a standard similar to that, just simply because of the power grid changes. So I think from around that level, probably up until about 2015, 2017, that's why we saw the huge drop. So I don't think we can really that's really less to do with local authority drive and mitigation adaptation. It's more just to do with power grid switches. So yeah, I'm just wondering about the whole scope 3 scenario, with it being like the lion's share of a local authority's emissions, really. So from both your perspectives, I suppose.
Helen, do you want to take that first, and I'll give my perspective on that after we've heard from you.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. CDP recognises that measuring scope 3 emissions is difficult, and local authorities on the A list haven't necessarily measured and reported scope 3. So in terms of scoring methodology is fully available online, but we're not just so I think the minimum we want is for you to have an emissions inventory, whatever that looks like. A lot of UK local authorities have reported scatter in the past. There is a question in the chat from Lauren about scatter being discontinued, and that is true. Anthesis will stop updating scatter. So you can still report the 2019 scatter report that was released last year, but a lot of our UK reporters are going to be reporting the BASE data. I know it's not BASE anymore, but so yeah, and that doesn't necessarily include a breakdown by scope. So we're just kind of, you know, working with working with our disclosers to kind of see case by case and help them report their emissions. But yeah, as I said, in terms of scoring, what we look for at a minimum is, do you have an emissions inventory? And that could include linking to the national data sets. And then at a minimum, we want you to report scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. Scope 3, if you have those figures to report, then great, that's excellent. But if you don't, it will not have a huge impact on your score. We do award points for it, but it's very, very minimal. And then I think the other thing to note is we're not just looking at emissions, and you know, our questionnaire covers a huge kind of, it's very comprehensive. So we're also wanting to know kind of how climate change is governed within the council. You know, have you identified key climate hazards and risks for your area? How are you, you know, do you have a climate action plan? What are the key adaptation and mitigation actions that you're undertaking? So it's quite a broad, covers a wide range of topics. So yeah, I hope that answers your question from the CDP side, and then maybe Peter can add to that on Reading's experience.
Yeah, it is a good challenge. Carol, Helen's answered for CDP. From our perspective, we know we've got a long way to go with scope 3. We've got a grip on some of it. You know, the things that are sort of arm's length, like we've got a municipal bus company, our waste partnership, a partnership with a leisure company. We've got a reasonable grip on all of that, but we know there are big gaps in our scope 3, and there's a piece of work going on to make sure that for our carbon plan for that crucial 2025 to 2030 period, which is the next sort of 5-year window, that we will have a lot more to say about that, and a piece of work going on with our colleagues in our procurement team to help us with that. We're slightly jealous of places like yours, where you've got that collective effort through the Greater Manchester authorities to invest in that sort of work. We haven't quite in Berkshire got the same infrastructure and spirit of collaboration across a wider area, which I think gives you some sort of benefit, and other areas are in that same position. So we do envy you with that, and we do look to people like you to lead the way on that. So thank you. The base data, as was, no, we recognise its limitations. I did say it's not perfect. There's a longer footnote that we usually use with that slide that acknowledges that that's not all down to local action, but there's something going on with how our economy is sort of structured, and it being fairly modern and fairly sort of well placed to be electrified, that allows us to take advantage of those sort of grid decarbonisation factors. So it is, and there is some differentiation in the data, even in Berkshire, quite big, you know, double-digit sort of percentage differences in the extent to which that data is different. So absolutely take the challenge that it's not all a reflection of local authority performance, but there is something going on in our local economy which is you know to be encouraged and make us a little bit feel a little bit optimistic about the future. Next hand was Anna.
Hi, sorry, first time I've used Teams. Anyway, I work for a large company, and we've just done EcoVadis. We're looking into joining Science Based Targets Initiative, and obviously we're doing SECR. And I just really wondered, is there a benefit of doing CDP as well? And like, how much overlap is there? How much extra work if we did do it as well? Yeah.
One for you, Helena.
Yeah. I don't know how well I can answer that question, just because I do work in our cities team. But if I could take that away and perhaps connect you with some of my colleagues who work with companies, I think they would be better placed to answer that question, and they know the different platforms much better than I do. Yeah, I apologise that I can't answer now.
It'd be great to have a contact that I can ask stuff like this to. So yeah, thank you. That'd be great.
I don't see any more hands up, but there are a few questions in the chat, which, bear with me, I'm just scanning those to see if I think we've possibly picked some of them up.
I think there's one question around how long it takes to complete the questionnaire.
Right.
So maybe you can answer that, Peter, since I've never.
Yeah, it's a little bit how long is a piece of string and how much detail you want to go into. And you can overdo it. I think I probably did the first time we did it, but learned my lesson the second time. So if you resist the temptation to throw the kitchen sink at it, and you could probably do it in a few days, concerted work with a bit of toing and froing and chasing your colleagues and liaison with CDP. Maybe a bit more the first time you do it. That would be my guesstimate. I confess I didn't keep a log, and you know I'd have a day where I'd have a blast at it and then send out a few questions to colleagues and then wait, then have another blast when they all came back. So depending on how efficient you are on your work style, and mine's not the most efficient, that would be my best guess.
Can I just add to that and say that there are no minimum reporting requirements. So I think Peter mentioned this in his presentation, but you don't need to fill out the full questionnaire in your first year to be able to submit. And the other thing to note is there are always options. You know, if you don't have data readily available in response to one of our questions, there is an option to say data not available or we do not know. And we always encourage you to just use that option as opposed to leaving the submission blank. Yeah, Lauren has also added some a little bit about her experience. I think the thing that takes the most time is chasing colleagues and sorry, I keep getting distracted by the chat. Chasing colleagues and working with colleagues and getting, you know, waiting for information from other team members. So yes, we do recognise that that takes time. You know, we're here to support you as much as possible. But my recommendation would be use your first year as a soft launch, and then, you know, you don't, as Peter said, you don't need to report all of the mitigation and adaptation actions that you're undertaking. You don't need to report everything that the council is doing. Something that we try to do on our side is ensure the questionnaire remains as kind of similar as possible year on year, so that we can use a copy forward function. So, you know, when you log into your 2023 questionnaire, a lot of your responses from 2022 will already be kind of populated in the questionnaire, and you'll have to kind of update, review those responses and add additional information. But I think, yeah, you can use it to kind of take a stages approach and do like as much as possible in your first year, and then build on that in subsequent years.
Okay, just scanning the question in the chat. There's one that probably is for me, which is about whether some of our emissions reduction came from selling off of building stock. The answer to that is yes. Yeah, disposals have been part of it, but not a not a massive part. We haven't had a massive disposals program. We're doing an asset strategy review at the moment, which might result in a bit more going. And I've got there is a pie chart in my mind from our carbon plan that shows exactly where the different shares of emissions came from. I'd struggle to. I'll cut and paste that into the chat so that it's there by the end of this, after the end of this meeting, for those who are interested. But it shows you, it's a bit of everything. I think that's one of the things Reading did very well, was just be at this for a long time, doing all the simple things really, and doing them quite well. There's no, we haven't built a sort of hydrogen power station or anything glamorous like that. There's no big ticket items. Those of you involved in this work will know there's lots of little things just chipping away and making a contribution. Fleet we haven't asked much of in the past, but we are now, and we're in the process of electrifying our fleet, and we've got new electric refuse trucks trundling around, 5 of them at the moment, and the other 7 to be replaced over the next couple of years, and that's making a big dent because they're the biggest users of diesel, obviously, within our fleet. So I hope that answers that. I'm seeing a question, or was it a comment from Carell again about the need for mandatory reporting? Absolutely, Carell, I'd support that. The things that government doesn't, it's a bit shocking, the things that government doesn't ask. The framework of statutory expectation and on local authorities for something so important, it's a bit of a glaring omission, isn't it? And it's quite difficult for local authorities to ask for that, because our mantra is usually just give us the tools and let us get on to do the job. But actually, in this instance, some sort of consistent frameworks and expectations to work to, I think, probably would be helpful.
And linked to that, there's a question about whether CDP is endorsed by government. The answer is no. They are aware that we exist and we have made ourselves known. But I think the government doesn't want to take a stance on, I mean, yeah, it's not my place to talk on behalf of the UK government, but yeah, they are aware of CDP. We are here and ready if they want to use our platform as a kind of common reporting framework for local authorities and or businesses. But currently they do not endorse CDP, and they do not endorse any other kind of voluntary reporting platforms.
A couple more hands I've got. Anna, your hand was that from previously, or was that a new question? She's taken that down.
Oh, sorry, was that me? No,
yes.
Yeah, I just don't know how to work Teams. Sorry, just ignore me.
And Tom, I think Tom had your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, so it was a question around data sets where there is more national and regional data available beyond the Bayes, DESNZ stuff. It'd be really useful to have a signpost to that, so that rather than digging around trying to find, say, low water quality data or air quality or travel modes, if that data is available, to say you can find it here. I don't know whether you found anything, Peter, on that.
No, I think certainly travel mode data that was based on local survey data, so that's how we get ours. I'm not sure there is a national data set for that. There's 1,000,001 national data sets on waste, but again, I went to my waste colleagues and I couldn't honestly tell you off the top of my head whether the information they've come back with is part of a national data set or whether that's locally derived. But they adapted it to fit the definition that was in the CDP questionnaire. So it needed a little bit of local input, even if the starting point was the national data set. Hope that helps, Tom.
Yep, thank you.
But it's a good point, and that possibly could be something CDP could help local authorities with, Helena, is that signposting where you know that data exists, because I remember a couple of things which I found out by stumbling across them, which
some things do exist at the national level, but I think transport data, I've not come across anything. Waste I have come across. What I'd recommend is that you get in touch as you're going through the questionnaire. The other thing we're able to do is connect, sometimes a local authority might ask, we're interested in collecting data on this particular topic. Do you know of any other local authorities that have done that? And then we're able to connect you with local authorities that have collected data. But yeah, just get in touch, Tom, if there's anything that you're looking for in particular.
I don't see any other hands up. Are there any other questions in the chat that we've not
There's
picked
another
up?
question about scatter from Louisa. So yes, so the question is, did you say the 2019 scatter data will be accepted, or is it CDP's recommendation to use the DESNZ data for this year? You can, the 2019 scatter data will be accepted. So yeah, you're more than welcome to report that. You can also report 2 emissions inventories. So yeah, you could report the scatter data and then add a row and add the DESNZ data as well, and just use the comment. Obviously in the UK we're aware of the situation, but if you just want to add a comment and say we've reported both data sets because Anthesis will no longer be updating their scatter tool, then you're welcome to do that. But in terms of scoring, it won't have an impact.
Thank you, Helena. Question from Lauren. I can see, does Reading have a climate change adaptation strategy and or adaptation action plan? Yes, Lauren, in various forms. We've got some historic work dating back to NA 188 that we're in the process of updating in terms of our corporate adaptation action plan. We did it just before we published the climate emergency strategy in 2020. We produced a document that's called the Reading Climate Adaptation Plan. It's more of a risk and vulnerability assessment that sort of pointed the way to actions that individual partners needed to take, which we submitted as part of our CDP submission, and I can post the link to that in the chat again later when we finish the event, so that people have got that as a reference point.
I don't know if people have access to the chat once it's the event
right,
has
okay.
ended, but
In
perhaps
case,
we can send an email with slides.
Yeah, I see there's a couple of requests for slides because we've got some links in the slides, so we will try and do that after this meeting. Anybody put a question in the chat that we've missed and want to put their hand up and make sure that we cover it? If not, I think it just remains for me to say massive thank you to Helena and CDP for being part of the event today. Huge thank you to all of you for attending. I hope that's been of use and of interest. We certainly don't pretend we've got everything right in Reading, but CDP is one of the organisations that's helping us get there, and I hope sharing our experience has been of some benefit to you. But yeah, thanks very much for coming and being part of the Reading Climate Festival, and hope to see you again, some of you next year, if not before. Thank you very much.
Thank you.